I guess we'll have our next poet here, Adrian Rice. Adrian Rice is from Belfast in the north of Ireland. He grew up in a working class community known as the Loyalist, sometimes called the Protestant community, although there are people of different religions there and no religion. But he grew up in that community. He then graduated from the University of Ulster. He has taught and lectured throughout the United Kingdom, Ireland, and America, and also on radio and TV. He lives in North Carolina, where he teaches at Appalachian State University and often teams up with a fellow Belfast man and traditional musician and songwriter, Alan Mearns, who is here right now. They have a group called the Belfast Boys, who I hope will come and play for us one day. His latest book is The Strange Estate, New and Selected Poems, 1968 to 2017. Here it is. There. And he is also featured in the current anthology, Open-Eyed, Full-Throated, Anthology of American Irish Poets. I'd like to give you Adrian Rice.
Thank you so much, Bill. And funny enough, the first poem I'm going to read is actually from that anthology. How did you know? We have Natalie Anderson with us, who's the editor of the book, who's a great friend. So, you know, what a lovely little start. Thank you, Bill. Thank you to, you know, all the wonderful work, you know, Ellen, and I see Claire. Thank you, Claire, for your lovely words too. And Levi, fantastic to meet you. Delighted there's a poet laureate in New Mexico. I'm delighted it's you, my man. And I'm always honored to be in the shadow of the great P. Muldoon. Paul Muldoon's one of my heroes. And he'll hate me for saying that, but he is. Attractive, just lovely to be reading with you. You know, it's great to be on this little team tonight. Awesome. So I'm going to get stuck in. My wife always says, try not to talk too much. I want to start with a poem called While I Slept from the book that Bill referenced. Because I woke up this morning with a dream. I dreamt the most amazing dream about the friend that I actually dedicated The Strange Estate to. He was my best friend back home. We grew up together in Rathcoole, next door to each other from the age of 6. And so we were, you know, the best of friends. And sadly, he died freakishly young just a couple of years ago, just out of the blue. And in the dream this morning, I was with him and we ended up in Whitehead Golf Course, which he loves. And he put his bag down at the end of the game and he propped it up. And I said, what's wrong? And he went into a pocket and he took out one of my books for me to sign in my dream. And I was embarrassed and I laughed. And I said, for goodness sake, you know, I said something like that, maybe a bit cruder, you know, wise up, put the book away. And he said, no, I want you to sign it. And I opened it embarrassedly and the page was blank. It isn't blank at the start of my book, but it was. And I really said to myself in my dream, should I tell him that he's dead? Like maybe I need to just stop the stream and tell him that he's actually dead. And my heart started to break. And I thought, no, I can't, I wouldn't be right. You know, I got to think of something to write in it. And I woke up and so make of that whatever you will. But this is a dream I had a few years ago. And it was about the house I was born in, Rosebrook, 30 Doak Road, the bottom of the Doak Road where it meets the Shore Road, and my grandparents' house. And it doesn't exist anymore. And some people from that era are still alive. A lot of them are dead, obviously. And anyway, this is a poem called While I Slept. I was the wick, unlit at first, as all around me my birth house reassembled itself from the ground up, like wax unmelting. 10 or so, the memorable age. Each room reappeared, each stick of furniture, showing me what had been forgotten. Each family member was there, those now gone, those still here. And I moved among them, solid but unseen. I was the wick, unlit at first, but when everything was fully formed, Memory peaked, and I became flame. The house and they began to melt away, all that memory had rebuilt while I slept. Now, the first poems I wrote, I got totally converted to poetry at the age of 14 by a remarkable English teacher called Samuel Thompson at Ballyclare High School. At that stage, I had the hair shaved and I was a little Rathcool, tearaway. But he just captured me by reading John Keats's Ode to a Nightingale out loud on the first day in class. And I didn't know what it was. I didn't know that it was poetry, but I knew that whatever it was, I needed to get more of it. But I was so respectful of the poets that we grew up with in Ireland. We don't just have Paul, we have people that Paul would look up to, like Seamus and John Montague and the Kennellys of this world and Derek Mahans and all sorts of people. And so I felt back home I didn't need to write, we really didn't need any other poets. But in the middle of my 20s, I was kind of talked into writing a poem. And then I started at 29, 30 with an artist friend, Ross Wilson, who just forced me to write. And we did the Muck Island box together. And that kind of just opened the trapdoor that I fell through. And all of a sudden, whatever a poet is, I think you're only a poet when you're writing poems, but whatever a poet is, I apparently became something like that. And I'm always amazed that the first poems I wrote for the Muck Island box were pure imagination. It was nothing to do really about my own life. It wasn't, it was just, I made them up. So here's a couple of quick ones that I made up. One's called The Mason's Tongue. Although a likable, charitable soul, he had a less than secret tongue. So it was removed and entombed, a ritual distance from the shore, sealed dumb in the packed sand. When the young man dug it up, out toiling for some bait, it dropped from the wet spade onto the cool slab of strand and lay like a gnawed curl of meat. The young man cupped it in his hands to get a closer look when, staring on his palms and with a strangely mournful note, it suddenly began to speak. Go tell all the brethren, there is no rest where I have gone. No answer comes from Yabulon. Bewildered and seized with sudden dread, he let the tongue flop to the sand, then scooped it back up with his spade and flung it out across the waves. Yet, though hushed upon the ocean bed, the tongue's words lapped about his head. Go tell all the brethren, there is no rest where I have gone. No answer comes from Yabulon. And here's another one from that early set. I lived in Isla McGee. I'd moved from the Hood out onto the Isla McGee Peninsula with my young family. And lots of people, through stories of the elderly people that I got to be friends with, down to the graveyard visits that I would pay on Isla McGee, the little rural graveyards. So many people had lost their lives by drowning. And I thought, you know what? I got to write a poem about a drowning, even though I know nothing about it, thankfully. And I kind of wanted to redeem, in a way, the whole horrible experience of losing somebody to drowning. And I wanted to get a little image of the snowstorms that every granny and granda has in their china cabinet and at the end of some poem or another. So it worked its way into this one. This is called The Drowning. Seeking luck through the evening, he spat into the torn mouth of the first fish pulled on board. Fish's eyes have seen strange things, he murmured, the uneasy burden of a prophetic word. With darkness came a listening wind. The sea made mouths at us all night. Not until the break of light did he come in, off Heddle's port, pockets inside out, mouth full of the ocean's spit. Suppose what they say is true. We sink beneath the sea, lost in the flood of memory. Then say his last journey was no macabre pirouette through the watery dark, but that he went down serenely, wrapped as in a childhood zone, in the whirling silence of a snowstorm under an oval dome. And then, folks, I'm jumping ahead. You come here to America. I came to the Norway College as a visiting writer. I won an award thing in '99. I was here for 5 weeks, and I got kidnapped by my beautiful wife Molly. I met her after 4 days here, and she followed me home the following year, and we spent 5 years in Ireland. And then LR asked me to come back to Hickory as a writer in residence for 6 months. And then, to cut a long story short, we were literally kidnapped at the end of that, and I haven't been allowed to go home. That's like 16 years ago, and we're happily kidnapped. But here I discovered that you had porches. My goodness, the Americans have porches. This is like a secret poetry machine, a porch. You know, we don't have them in Ireland, or else they're covered in because of the weather. And here I could sit on the porch in Hickory and just watch everything. And I started to strangely receive poems. And here's just 2 quick ones from that. This is one actually dedicated to Ross Wilson, my artist friend from home. And he doesn't really enjoy the dedication because there's kind of something serious going on behind this poem. But I was sitting on the porch one night and a storm started to brew, and literally the blackest leaf you could ever imagine just blew in. Solitary leaf just came into the porch and just landed on my open notebook. Like jet black leaf. I've never seen a leaf that black. And I just closed my notebook and the thunder started and I went into the house. But I got this poem really strangely that night. So I called it A Dark Leaf. It's just a little, for want of a better word, a little sonnet thing. Along the alley of our avenue, birds flicker nervously between tall trees, nests bobbing under the black and blue of a stormful sky. The high branch kelp sways in the lifting wind wave, delivering a dark leaf through the mailbox of my porch, dropping onto my notebook like a sign. Everything is darkening. Lightning flirts with telegraph poles. Thunderballs rumble the bowling lanes overhead, their mumble silencing the cooing of a dove. Here comes the rain, so redolent of home. Odd, the things we miss of the things we love. Time to pack up and go inside alone. And then I got a poem on the porch one night that really surprised me. My wife and I she'd picked me up at the community college when I worked there late one night, and we didn't have our little 10-year-old. He wasn't born. And we went across the road late at night to get bread and milk from Walmart, of all places. And Walmart has taught me, never underestimate the temple that is Walmart. I've got some amazing poems from just being there, and being very humbled in there. And we were in it one night and we were at the checkout and we noticed this, what I can only describe as a working class couple in front of us with their children. And the kids were crying for these helium balloons, expensive balloons for a party. And I just knew that they couldn't afford them. We couldn't afford them. And so I just brought the Irish accent in and I said, listen, you don't want to buy those. You want to buy the wee packets of balloons, like 100 of them that your dad have to blow up. And it's going to like nearly kill him. He's going to be blowing these balloons up and speaking in a squeaky voice. And the kids started laughing and they went for it. So as the parents walked off, the guy turned to me and kind of just waved and mouthed a thank you, and I waved at him. And I said to Molly, there's a poem in that. I've just no idea what it is, but there's a poem there. And it was years later, sitting on the porch again. I went out, I sat down one night, and I just wrote the word breath at the top of the notebook. And the opening verse just came out. What is death but a letting go of breath? And I thought, that's nah. And I thought, no, it's demanding to be written. And so it just flowed really quickly that night. Very strange poem. And because The Guardian picked up on it, it's taken on a life of its own, this poem. So it's called Breath. What is death but a letting go of breath? One of the last things he did was to blow up the children's balloons for the birthday party, joking and mock cursing as he struggled to tie all those footery teeth. Then he flicked them into the air for the children to fight over. Some of them survived the party and were still there after the funeral in every room of the house, bobbing around mockingly on the least draught. She thought about murdering them with her sharpest knife, each loud pop an angry bullet from her heart. Instead, in the quietness that followed her children's sleep, she patiently gathered them all up, slowly undoing each raggedy nipple, and one by one she took his last breaths into her mouth. What is life but a drawing in of breath? And then Attracta was brought up the graveyard. Thank you, Attracta. You brought up. We're in sync here tonight. And in these COVID times, one of the only walk that my wife and I and my little boy do when we can talk him into it is from the house down through the little neighborhood here and round the beautiful graveyard and back. You know, and so I've become very fond of the graveyard. And so I guess this is some kind of a COVID poem. I'm not quite sure if that's what it is, but I'm hoping that if I can get the rest of a new book together, that it'll actually make the title of a new book. And I think the times we're living in, the title, The Chances of Harm, is probably appropriate in so many ways. And it certainly takes me back to Ireland too, you know, growing up throughout the Troubles and all the rest of it. The Chances of Harm is just sticking with me as a title. It's actually just out in the New Asheville Poetry Review, which is an amazing journal. I got to plug the Asheville Poetry Review. Keith Flynn and the boys and the women up there do great work with that. But this is called The Chances of Harm. I was in the graveyard and I just saw this. I knew everything went really, really quiet. And I just instinctively looked up and a huge hawk had just cruised in. And on the way out of the graveyard, in the middle of this amazing bush, like a tree bush, there was a huge owl. And the two things just came together for me. So here's The Chances of Harm. It arrives like God, living, killing machine, silent hearse of the air, rolling in on no wheels, makes perfect weight between wide wings, uttermost branch of the tallest tree, all judge and jury, Lord of no doubt. I am species safe, so too the buried bones of these fields of death, whose headstones are tills awaiting the cha-ching of the last trump. A big daylight owl seems unimpressed, blinking the chances of harm. A cardinal goes off like a car alarm. And then the last poem I'll read is to take you back to Ireland a bit. It's an old cliche, I'm sure. I'm sure Paul attract anybody that's been here, lived here any length of time. The old cliche is that you have to go away from your country to write about it. And I always thought that was just a terrible cliche, but in my case, it's kind of strangely true. And I've been writing poems for a few years now that I've published here and there in a couple of the books, but it's building up into a big sequence that I hope to call 11th Night. And that's a term from the Protestant hood back home, you know, around the 12th of July, the 11th night, the bonfires, all of that. And I guess it's my little take, it's my little nod to 12th night, you know, but in the end, but it's 11th night. And the poems started and they're all coming out in these strange 11 syllable long rhyming couplets, which is just not normally how I would write at all. And they kind of look like stories rather than poems, you know, but it's just the way that they're determined to be written. And one of them is based on the poem, it's called Budgie. And a budgie is what you would call over here a parakeet. You know, it's we call them budgies back home. That's the only name I know for them back home, a budgerigard. And in Rathcoole, where I grew up, the Protestant side of things. Now, I grew up Protestant, but at 18 and my father was 40, my father found out It's a long, long story that he was actually a Catholic from South Armagh, and his mum was actually a Catholic from County Tyrone, from Omagh. So, you know, I found out all these wonderful Catholic relatives, you know. So, you know, I like to think of myself as a cross-community poetic enterprise, you know. And so really in these poems, I'm trying to maybe explain the Protestant hood to the Catholic side of my family. But this poem, Budgie, is also based on the map of Ireland. Now, I know Paul, one of my favorite poems of all time is a short little poem by Paul Muldoon about, you know, seeing like his child in the kind of fetal position as like the map of Ireland, satellite map of Ireland. Spectacular. Oh, I've always loved that. So that's always been in the back of my mind. But I've always, my friend Alan, who's on here with me, I play the music with, it was him that got out of me how I think of the map of Ireland. And I think of the map of Ireland in a totally different way to anybody else that I know. Everybody sees Ireland, the island, back to the British mainland. And, you know, down through the years, poets have been writing about Ireland, basically, excuse my language, being shafted by the British mainland, you know, taken advantage of from behind, as it were, and all of that, and victimized. And I never saw it like that. From a kid up, when I looked at the map of Ireland, it looks to me like a budgie that is flying towards the British mainland. And so Lough Neagh becomes like the eye of the budgie, and the Ards Peninsula is like the beak, and Dublin is like the belly of the budgie, and you've got the wings of, you know, Sligo and whatever. And so I wrote a poem called Budgie for this 11th night sequence, and it's like a Protestant with Catholic blood and heritage at the center back home who's trying to say, here's the map of Ireland in a poem, and it's non-sectarian. This is an Ireland worth fighting for, if you know what I mean, for both sides. And it has an epigraph from William Drennan, who I did an MPhil thesis on, the great radical Presbyterian, who coined the phrase the Emerald Isle back in 1795 with a poem called Erin. And in that same poem, he wrote, drive the demon of bigotry home to his den. And where Britain made brutes, now let Erin make men. So here's my poem, Budgie. Thank you for listening, by the way. I can't wait. I love the track. I can't wait to hear Paul. Budgie. It seemed like every single house had one, except us, though we had an aquarium. The other house comfort of the working class, one behind the bars, the other behind glass. I thought it odd that the underprivileged would happily keep something tanked or caged, considering our hard human condition. I guessed it was our identification with creatures as poorly predestined as we often believed our hand-to-mouth selves to be. Keeping birds in seed is a real kind of love, and sprinkling fish flakes like manna from above. Now, by a strange quirk of imagination, some new light from within, something gene given. Every time I saw a map of Ireland, I rebelled against the usual notion, the bird's eye, map driven visualization of Ireland back to the masculine mainland, her leafy petticoats eyed up for stripping, her feminine fields ripe for penile ploughing. Even as a child, I refused to see it as a victim, back turned towards Britain, inviting colonial rear-ending. I saw it as a battling budgie, facing the mainland, proudly, prepared for what might come winging over the waves from the gauntlet realm. Though couched by Drennan to properly provoke his fellow Irishmen to throw off the yoke, it was no base posterior of the world, arsehole waiting to be slavishly buggered by a foreign foe even our side flinched at. No more servile hungering for the lazy root, but male and broad-shouldered as the hill of caves, where the united Irishmen first swore slaves would be set free by jointly overturning the home-based kingdom of the sectarian. Our bold-hearted budgie had come of age, had climbed the ladders and looked in the mirrors, then ignored the dungeon doors and bent the bars, self-paroled, assuming independent heirs. So turned towards the royal raven of England, to my mind, our Irish budgie was crowned with the head of Ulster, the brawn and brains of radical Belfast, Athens of the north, with the clear blue eye of Nay and beak of Ards, heart lungs and Dublin barrel bulge of Leinster, the fairy feet and claws of mighty Munster, and thrown back western wings of mystic Connaught. 4 provinces, 4 square, forever landlocked, friend of brother Celts, but full of righteous rage against the keepers of the keys to the cage. The bard's blessed plot, his precious stones set in the silver sea, his dear, dear land, his England. Yes, no Catholic cage nor Protestant pound could hold my dissenting ideal of Ireland. For in spite of spite, it was Drennan's Eden, in the ring of this world, the most precious stone. His emerald of Europe, his emerald isle, which no vengefulness would finally defile. Thank you so much. These were great. Thank you.
The roar of 200 hands clapping. Thank you so much, Adrian. Adrian Rice. It's a wonderful book here. Thank you, Adrian.